Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Overthrows podcast. I'm Behram Kazi, who you can find at DefMango on Twitter. And with me, as always, is Jarrod Kimber, who you can find literally everywhere. And today we're going to talk about Afghanistan defeating South Africa in an ODI series for the very first time. Let's go!
NVPlay helped me make this content. For detailed performance breakdowns of your game using technology and data, contact them today. Hit Wicket is the cricket game backed by Harsha Bogle and me, so you know it's full of nerd energy. This strategic cricket game isn't just about frantic tapping. You make decisions based on how cricket actually works. You've got to set a batter up, right? And you can't hit a six from the first ball. Hit Wicket knows all that, and they made a game that makes it work with a few gaming twists in there as well. So play, build, and manage your team, because you are the batter, the bowler, the coach, the selector. I mean, you're basically everything in this game, right? And there's no ads on Hit Wicket. So download it for free for mobile and unleash your inner cricket legend.
All right, then, guys, we see that, or I see that there's already a few in the comments. We've got Prats, Shaurya Pathak, Vignesh Ram, Rahul, Agro Kopite, and then we've got Babar Azam in the comments, Jarrod, thanking you for his toe, or fixing his toe.
It makes us feel like there's so much Babar Azam content and about us in his toe that I kind of feel like, is it podiatry? Is it podiatry when it's toes? I should know what it is. It's whatever the one is with the toes.
I think it is podiatry.
Cool. I've never been to a podiatrist, but yeah, we are. Maybe I should just start referring to us as the toe doctors.
Yeah, or you could be the toe whisperer. I like that one better.
I do like toe whisperer.
Also, Savgi is here.
It's a little bit Quentin Tarantino toe whisperer, though, isn't it?
Yeah. But, I mean, it makes more sense than the toe doctor. Savgi from South Africa is also here. So, hello to you, Savgi. And, of course, the premise of today's show is Afghanistan creating history. They defeated South Africa in an ODI series for the very first time. The entire ODI series was in Sharjah. So, it wasn't like all of the UAE. It was strictly Sharjah. And Afghanistan won by a margin of 2-1. And I mean, if you think about the recent past, Jarrod, in early 2023, Afghanistan defeated Pakistan for the first time in international cricket. Then in the ODI World Cup, they beat England for the first time in international cricket. And then very recently, in the 2024 T20 World Cup, they went on to defeat Australia and New Zealand for the first time in international cricket as well. Their latest victim is, of course, South Africa. And after beating them for the very first time in the first ODI, they doubled down and won the series, took it an unassailable lead in the second game. That's huge.
It's interesting when you look at the history of cricket, because we usually see the Bangladesh mode is much more normal, right? You struggle for a while, you have a couple of wins. You don't usually have a couple of wins together. Test cricket's even harder, all these sorts of things that are very, very normal. And then, if you look at Pakistan, or actually, no, Pakistan's not a good one. If you look at perhaps India and New Zealand, after a certain amount of time, they're just normal cricket sides, and then they start to rise, right? And Afghanistan's skipped all of that, because they've basically gone from a team that we didn't think was a genuine, consistent threat against good sides to someone who feels like they could beat any good side in the world. I mean, India's the only one they probably don't match up brilliantly against. But
India is also the only team left in international cricket, or at least the top team that they haven't defeated yet.
Yeah, and it's, if they play, they might still beat India at one stage, but everyone else, you're just like, but they match up really well. Like that South Africa game, I've talked about this a little bit. Sorry, not South Africa, the second South African game, right, where they make 300 odd. Is that right?
Yeah, so they make tons of runs, 3 something. And then they bowl South Africa out for 130 odd. And they register their biggest ever win in ODI cricket. Like 177 runs is the margin. And I mean, they've had big wins before, but nothing's quite stacked up to this one.
But you go to that game, it's really, really interesting. So I look, I don't believe in all the win predictors and everything. As in, I don't like the metrics that they use, right? I don't use them in my work. But when you're on the scorecard on Cricinfo or wherever else, you're always going to get one of those to come up, right? And when South Africa, I think it was just before the end of the innings. So maybe when South Africa started to bat, they were about 49% chance of winning. But just before that, I think they were like 51, 52% chance of winning, according to Cricinfo. And the betting markets were saying that South Africa were a 5-1 shot, right? And I thought the 5-1 was maybe pushing it a little bit because South Africa, if they have anything, it's probably you look at this current lineup, they have a bunch of players who can knock the ball around, who can get you up to 300, and then if they're in with a chance, they could get it. So maybe 250 threes maybe would have been a better number. But remember looking at all this and just thinking at the time, that is just how far things have gone, that the numbers don't even back up how good Afghanistan is. But everyone with eyes is sitting there going, this is tough. Right, like South Africa's still got a chance here, but this is tough. And that to me is the difference, and the fact that they went on to dominate that game. So I just said, Cricinfo thought it was a 50-50 chance, and literally South Africa, were they 1 for 60 or something like that in that game? I remember they were going okay for a little while. I think it was Dazorzi, Temba, and then Reza Hendricks got in and he couldn't hit the ball off the square, and that was it. They never looked like it from that point forward. And what we're seeing here is, it really is watching a bowling lineup fully actualize right in front of our eyes. Right?
That's true.
And we see this a lot. We've talked about Bangladesh's bowling lineup recently. Sri Lanka's is probably another one that we've talked about. Sometimes you look at them on paper and you're like, wow, how's anyone going to play that? And then that team keeps losing. And you're like, oh, okay. That's not ideal. This seems to be the one that we were going back as far as maybe even 2019 and thinking to ourselves, there's a lot of good bowling options here that they can use. And it didn't quite work. And, the following World Cups, it didn't quite work. And you kept thinking to yourself, well, we just overhyped them. And I remember we would get comments on videos like this where people just overhyped them. They're not that good. And then suddenly it's just all clicked together at one stage. The batting is consistent without being brilliant, but there are elements of brilliance in it. And the bowling, it's like at any stage, they can give the ball to someone who's going to cause someone an issue. Right? Like,
and
it's like the old Pakistani sides when they were really good.
You mentioned how, back in 2019, we expected them to be better. But I remember while the spin bowling stocks were great back then as well, they didn't really have a great pacer. Even though they started their cricket with, the Zadrans and all of those guys, Shapu Zadran, remember? The knockoff Shoaib Akhtar. But, they had better seamers originally than spinners. Then in that 2019 sort of era, it was just the spinners. And now, if you look at that first game where they had South Africa reduced to 36 for 7, right? I literally came out of my podcast in E11, like for Pro Sports, and I was like, 36 for 7? What the hell is going on here? And there's reason behind that. And that's Fazal Haq Farooqi. Guy ends up taking 4 for 35 in that game, and he now has more than 100 ODI wickets for Afghanistan. I think he's the third Afghan cricketer to get to that landmark. And the left-arm quick is still young. And if you look at his progress in the last year and a half or so, he's covered massive ground. Like, he was brilliant in the T20 World Cup as well. So that is a big edge with the new ball that Afghanistan now have that they never did in the past.
If you go back, it's really interesting. And I think I might have written about this in around 2016, which was they started off with, as you said, those quicks. And by the time they got all their spinners come through, their quicks were just crocked, right? Like, obviously.
Hamid Hassan,
Zadran just could not ever stay on the field. Daulat Zadran, I thought was a fantastic bowler. We really didn't even see that much of him. And Shapur was probably not, I don't think he was quite at their level, but because he was left arm and he could do some damage, they all kind of tail off just as the spinners start to rise up. Like Rashid Khan, the first time I really took a lot of attention to him was in the 2016 World Cup, because just before he played in that World Cup, he'd taken 10 wickets against the England Lions. And I remember talking to someone playing from the Lions going, we've never seen anything like this. I don't know how you played this guy. Right. And then he went to the World Cup and he played really well. And that was just at the time when the seam was going in one direction and the spin was going in the other. And then, of course, you added Majib to all this. And, they've got Waqar Salimkil is a really good bowler who's nowhere near the international side. KS Ahmed KS Ahmed would start for a lot of good international teams at the moment. Right. These guys aren't even close to being regulars in their sides.
Cass is not a regular, right?
No, he's not even close to being a regular, is he? Like, very rarely he will come across. So, and Waqar Salimkil has been overtaken by the other left-arm wrist spinner. They've got good finger spinners in the country as well.
Noor Ahmed.
Yeah, Noor Ahmed is one. But they've got good finger spinners in the country that don't even get close. Like, they've just got this incredible flock of those. And then you've got two seamers, and it really is mostly, from what we could tell, two seamers, right? It's Fazal, as you said, and Naveen, right? And then they've got Omarzai. He's like he's like the.
But hasn't Naveen retired from everything else other than T20s?
He has, but he's still in the mix. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, as in, he's still around. But having those things. Remember, this is what I would say. We're going to see a lot of, by the way. He's retired from everything. My guess is the next World Cup, he might still be available in one-day cricket. I think we'll see a lot of players who'll say they're not available, and then suddenly when the World Cup comes around, whatever.
Or the Champions Trophy, right?
Yeah.
Because that's right around the corner.
It might be that as well. He might just come back for that. But I think we'll see a lot of that sort of stuff. But regardless of that, two seamers from nowhere is a big step up to 2019 World Cup. They had Gulbadine as one of their seamers, right? Like you're talking about proper strike bowlers. And if you go back and you look at their success in the 2023 World Cup, the 2024 World Cup, what we're seeing now, it's so often that it's one of their two seamers. And if that doesn't work, you throw the ball to the spin and the spin does it. Like it really is a combination of it's not like they're dependent on one great bowler anymore.
And I mean, Fazil Haq Farooqi is just 24 years of age. He turned 24 yesterday. I checked that while you were, in between your monologue. And this is a guy who is just kind of, peaking or starting to peak in international cricket. And he can move the ball both ways with the new ball, right? So that is a lot of things going on or going right for one cricketer. You also mentioned how they have droves of, finger spinners. Well, we saw one in this series. I had never seen him bowl before. I know that he's an under-19 star and he's still 18 years of age. But right-arm finger spinner Allah Mohammad Gazanfar, what a name, took 3 for 20 in that first game. And he was also he played a major role in South Africa crashing to 36 for 7, in the first 10 overs or so. Did you catch any of his bowling? Because I did. And I was reminded a bit of Mahesh Theekshana because he was bowling the carom ball a lot. And that's kind of where my mind went instantly.
No, I didn't. But I remember a while back, someone sent me a message that I think it was a franchise who was saying, "Do you know anything about this guy?" And they might have even sent me some dodgy clip that they'd found online or something like that. So I knew that there was someone coming. And he's the sort of guy I was thinking about before when I'm all constantly being. I remember when Waqar Salim came through. I heard about him beforehand, and KS Ahmed and all these guys. People are really looking out for spin from there. So there's a lot of guys that you get told about, and then sometimes they never come. And then next thing you know, they're starring in some random franchise. So I'm not surprised that he's done well, but I haven't seen that. But yeah, I mean, there's something about their spinners. It's quite interesting. I would say that they create the most non-traditional spinners in the world at the moment. The only country that's close is Sri Lanka, isn't it? Yeah. And it's Sri Lanka is quite interesting. They've got, people who bowl with both arms, and they've got Theekshana, and even Hasaranga is a different kind of leg spinner, and, all this sorts of stuff. But it's Muhammad Nabi is probably the only standard spinner that we've seen from Afghanistan in a while. Everyone else has got a little bit of quirk to them, whether it's just spinning the ball both ways or having multiple wrong-uns rather than just one wrong-un or whatever. There seems to be a lot there. So it's a very interesting one.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at that second game, right? 9 South African wickets fell to spin, which was also a record. And Rashid Khan, who on his birthday returned figures of 5 for 19, was the star of the show. But then you've got slow left armer Nangyali Akharote, who picked up career best figures of 4 for 26. And I have kept an eye on this kid. And every time he's kind of gotten an opportunity, he has impressed, right? Couldn't really do much in the T20 World Cup. I think they gave him an over or two at best. But, we're talking about all of these guys. Allah Mohammad Gazanfar, Akharote, of course there's Rashid Khan. Mujib's not even playing. Noor Ahmed is not even playing. I don't think any other team has that many limited overs spinners who could literally start a game. I mean, India would come close, right? But this is mystery spin. It's a bit different.
Yeah. So what India have 5, don't they?
Kuldeep, Jadeja. I mean, are we still counting Ashwin in limited overs?
Yes, because he could, if they needed him. I know, so I put him Akshar, and then you have Chahal, right?
Yeah, but Chahal, I think they're done with now. So they're
they're done with
Bishnoi route.
Oh yeah, okay, Bishnoi. Yeah, you could throw Bishnoi in there as well. So there's probably 5 or 6, depending on where you think some of those guys are. Yeah, I think you're right, and I think the difference is it's the variety. I think even if you look at someone like Mujib. and sorry, what was the new guy's name again? I've already forgotten.
Gazanfar.
Gazanfar. If you look at Gazanfar and Mujib, I've only seen a little bit of Gazanfar, as I said, but I think they're slightly different versions of the same bowler, right?
Yeah, I would agree.
And I think there's an element of that in India's, if you look at Akshar compared to Jadeja, right? And Bishnoi compared to Chahal, right? So I think there's an, I think Varun just put up Washington Sundar. So
of course,
Sundar and Ashwin are a little bit more similar. But you go through the Afghanistan spinners, and it does feel like they're all like different versions. There's something Sri Lanka about this, that there's like everyone is developing in a different way, that you could actually really play around with these things quite a bit if you wanted to.
Yeah. I would just like, the differentiating factor for me is that barring Kuldeep, I mean, as good as all those Indian spinners are, I won't expect like Washington Sundar to end up with 5 for 19, you know? Whereas with any of these Afghan kids, I can, or even Rashid Khan, throw him in there, you feel like on their day they could run through a batting lineup. And in India, like Kuldeep is the guy who I can see doing that.
Yeah.
You know?
I think you're right. A lot of the other bowlers probably, especially the white ball bowlers for India, are probably more stock bowlers and defensive finger spinners. Whereas what Afghanistan is, they're probably not as good as they. That's probably why Nabi still is around, right? Because he can still do that role. Whereas the vast majority of the rest of them are potential match winners who can have very bad days as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, you've got 3 solid spin bowling performances over there, and they've won a series, right? Karote, and then Gazanfar and Rashid Khan. But there is a bit of a catch, Jared. This was an extremely depleted South African side. And I'm just going to take the names of all the players who weren't playing in the series. David Miller, Heinrich Klaassen, Kagiso Rabada, Marco Janssen, Keshav Maharaj, Tabrez Shamsi, Gerald Coetzee, Rassi van der Dusen. All of these guys could, you know, on like if South Africa are playing an important ODI, they would probably like at least, you know, 80% of those guys would feature in a first team. So there is a bit of that. But then on the flip side, it's not like Afghanistan had Mujib or Noor or even Ibrahim Zadran, who is critical to their success, right? He is the accumulator up top. So, I mean, would you say that, you know, it takes a bit of the sheen off of this victory?
No, I don't think it does, because it's very rare now that teams put out full strength sides, right? Like,
that's fair.
So look at the England Australia series at the moment. I don't know if you've been following that much at all, but like, you've got some random players on both sides who this might be the only time we ever see them, or they might go on to be stars. You know, no one knows.
And there's still no Sam Hain.
There's still no Sam Hain. You got Aaron Hardy using the new ball in some of these games. Is this like, well, no serious ODI is Aaron Hardy. Like, is there a bigger Aaron Hardy fan in the world than I am, right? And even I'm not saying Aaron Hardy should be taking the new ball, right, for Australia. Come on now, look at some of the spinners that have been played, and and all this sort of stuff. That's what teams put out now. Outside of Pakistan, who will use their best players until they all fall apart, the rest of the world uses bilateral games really to see who has it and who doesn't have it, and maybe try someone out in a new role, or try someone who hasn't done anything before, or something like that. But yeah, so I don't think that takes away from it, but you have to mention it as well, right? Like, you have to mention that this is South Africa trying to get something out of this. I think losing back to back, that's what it is. If you go through the history, of course, of teams beating sides for the first time, generally there's an injury or there's a resting or someone didn't want to play. But this message from Crunk's quite interesting, because he's saying, is it a golden generation like New Zealand, or is it something else? There's no way we could tell if it was a golden generation yet, because what a golden generation means, for those who don't know in sport, is essentially it means a bunch of people come through at a similar age, right? And so they're going to play for a period of time. So think of Ricky Ponting, Glenn McGrath, Shane Warne, right? 3 guys of a similar age, where you happen to have 3 great players who will go for a long period of time. And so, we're looking at India at home at the moment with Ashwin and Jadeja. When Ashwin and Jadeja move on, we'll have to see if they could do what the West Indies did, right? Which wasn't a golden generation, which was 2 generations, right? They literally, the West Indies restocked their fast bowlers on the fly, found a few extra other batters, and kicked on for another decade, right? Whereas Australia didn't. Australia had that dip and then eventually came back again as well. And it's the same with New Zealand. You have Bolt and Wagner and Williamson and Watling and Taylor and Southey all of a similar sort of generation at the same time, you're pretty lucky. What happens next, we don't know. And it's the same with Afghanistan. But if you look at the ages of the Afghanistan players, this is really tough because they don't know their own ages in some cases. But if you look at the ages of the Afghanistan players, it doesn't suggest to me that there's a bunch of guys about to age out, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, to be fair, Rashid Khan is not 25 years old.
He's not,
say
but
that with certainty.
He's what, 28 or 29 probably?
Probably.
If he keeps fit, there's no reason why he can't play to 36 or 37, right? So there's a decade, right? Mujib is probably closer to his listed age, would be my guess. You know, from what I know of the different families and how these things are done and everything. But they've got a lot of younger batters coming through who are again listed in their 20s. If they were listed in their late 20s or early 30s, I'd be a lot more worried. But they're also finding players consistently, right? And that's when it feels like it's more of a repeatable system rather than what we saw with New Zealand, where it was like New Zealand were really good. But if you had an injury to Bolt and Southey, it was going to completely drop off in a way that we maybe didn't see with other teams that are a bit more sustainable. So the truth is we don't know. You only really know about a golden generation when everyone's about to age out and you look at the next crop and you go, oh shit, there's no one coming. But I think it's a bit more sustainable than that.
I mean, golden generation or not, it is their best ever team, right? Because they've never been this good before. So that's definitely true. Also, you mentioned young batters. So along those lines, after scoring a duck in the first game, opening batter Rahmanullah Gurbaz, who also had a brilliant T20 World Cup, by the way, he scored 105 and then 89 in the next two games. And he ended with the Player of the Series award. Now, he has 7 ODI tons to his name, which is already the most for Afghanistan. He's overtaken Mohammad Shehzad, who had 6. And only Sachin Tendulkar and Quinton de Kock have more hundreds or had more hundreds than him before turning 23. So he's got a case here for already being Afghanistan's best batter ever.
Who's second?
I mean, who else do you have? Who else do you have in your head?
Yeah. So what if we look at their... You're talking purely ODIs at the moment, or are you talking both?
I'm talking limited overs because, you know, there was Asghar Afghan or Asghar Stanikzai, whatever you want to call him.
Yeah.
He was one, right? Then maybe you can throw Nabi into the mix, but he's more all-rounded than batter.
Yeah. So in ODI cricket, they've got Ramit Shah's made 3,700 runs at a decent average, but a strike rate of 71.
Yes.
Mohammad Shehzad, of course, back in the day.
Of
But
course.
again, being mid-30s with a great strike rate. Then you've got Shahidi, and then you've got Ibrahim Zadran, from 33 games has an average of 48 with a strike rate of 80.
But what those guys can't do is hit like Gurbaz.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that I think when Gurbaz, Ibrahim Zadran, I kind of still feel is their best batter. But he's terrible in T20 cricket, right? Like, I think he's got like a negative strike rate in T20 cricket. Whereas Gurbaz is 26 and 135 and it's a lot of good in stuff as well. That's in T20. And then in ODI so far, he is averaging 40 with a strike rate of 90.
He is also he's a standard deviation king in ODIs. Like, he will get those hundreds or he will fall early. I feel like that's his trend. You can check that. You can cross-reference it. But that's what I remember. Because even in this series, if you look at the first game, he's got a duck. And then he goes on to score 105 and 89. So he doesn't have a lot of middling scores. He either goes on one or just departs early.
I know a couple of experts that I'm aware of who sort of say things like... who've talked to me about him, and they think he's the most, I suppose the word they would use, I'm not sure if they use it exactly, but repeatable. So you get, I'm trying to think what's his some of the other players coming through, like, well, Mohammad Shehzad. I remember having a conversation with someone in cricket about Mohammad Shehzad about whether a blast team should get him, and we were like, I just don't know if he could consistently do it in blast cricket. Shahidi was another one. Zadran was another one. We just like, it's not that we think they're bad batters, but whether they can repeat what they are doing consistently in multiple different areas. And I remember talking to someone about Gurbaz, and they were saying, I think that he should be, his floor in places he's not very good should be a lot higher than a lot of other Afghanistani batters. So that's one reason why Afghanistani batters don't get picked up in franchise cricket. Everyone thinks their ceiling is huge, but they're like, when they're not batting good, they don't exist. And so there is a theory with him that he's a little bit more robust, maybe is the way of looking at it.
Estelle picked Gurbaz up in the crick picks that we did for, I believe, all-time wicketkeeper batters in T20s. So there's that.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, I've spoken to him, right? I've been in a couple of presses with Rahmanullah Gurbaz during the PSL, and he's definitely got the mentality of, or you could call it Mamba mentality. He's like that sort of guy who wants to take you down. He really likes to win, and he takes his cricket very seriously. So if you have him in a presser, expect to see some charisma, right? Expect some interesting answers. And I like that about him. I think his overall personality really fits the whole Afghan template of, hey, we're not pushovers. We can beat you, and that's the vibe I get from this particular team as well. Even the other batters, look, you already mentioned Rahmat Shah, how he's the highest ODI run scorer for Afghanistan. Got a 50 in this series as well, but it was off 66 deliveries. So I don't know how crucial he is to the whole mix. Of course, he can prove to be a perfect foil maybe in terms of consolidation. But then you've got guys like Azmatullah Omarzai. This guy smashed 86 runs off 50 deliveries in the second game, which is already the highest ever strike rate for any Afghan batter in the history of ODI cricket whenever anyone has faced a minimum of 50 deliveries. We've seen his stock rise over the years. Go back 2 years, we saw him in the PSL. This year, we saw him in the IPL. He can hit a long ball. He can bowl with the new ball. That is a lot of value add for a single cricketer. He's like Hardik Pandya light, kind of.
Yeah, I think the player I've compared him to the most is, oh my God, now I've forgotten the name. The Dutch all-rounder.
Logan Van Beek?
No. The young guy. The guy hit in the face by Pakistan. Why can I not remember?
Bastelader.
I almost said his dad's name. That's how weird. I can remember every detail about his life except his name. I was like, Tim Delader? Is there a Tim Delader? Baz Delader. So in that, they are really raw, right? But you look at the raw talent that they have. They both can bowl upwards of high 80s, low 90s. I don't think either of them could ever be consistently in the low 90s, but I'm pretty sure both of them could probably touch it if they had to. They don't really know what they're doing with the ball at times. They don't know what their best delivery is, but they're also, in Omarzai's case, Omarzai opened the bowling, I think, in the IPL. He's the sort of guy that if you say you need to open the bowling, and he's done it for Afghanistan as well. So yeah, of course I'll do it. And you're just like, wow. And you look at Baz Delader, and Baz Delader is exactly the same. Of course I'll bowl him to death. And you're just like, but you have no skills to do these things, right? But they're willing to do it. And then you look at their batting, there's a freedom in their batting. It's a little bit raw and it's not quite put up, but you look at the basic movements that they make. I'm trying to think of someone like a young Ben Stokes, where when you watch Ben Stokes bat when he was young, you're like, oh, he's not quite a batter, but he kind of gets it and he's kind of in the right area. Compared to someone like Sam Curran that you look at and you think maybe he can make himself into a good number 7, but he's never going to be a batter, right? Unless he, something really changes in his career. And
that to the Punjab Kings.
I've tried. But you look at Omarzai, and I think that's what it is. It's like I don't even know what Omarzai's eventual position is, right? I don't know where don't know where his best spot in the batting order is. But I know he can bat. I don't know where he's going to be most useful with the ball, but I know he has bowling talent as well. And he's young and he's developing. He's a fascinating cricketer, but it's probably going to be a couple of years of high highs, low lows, I think, for him. But when it comes together in one game, he just wins games for them, right? We've seen it before. He'll take 3 wickets out of nowhere because he can swing the ball. He can nip it around a little bit as well, but he can certainly swing the ball and he can hit him, right? But you watch him come in sometimes and it's like, sometimes he comes into the crease and I think to myself, he doesn't know what to do here. He doesn't know whether he should be knocking it around. He doesn't know whether he should be defending and consolidating. He doesn't know whether he should be slogging. And he gets a bit confused. And that is what happens to all-rounders who don't develop the same way that top order players do. By the time a player who's a top order player is used to that, they've played so much cricket in so many situations. They get out there and they're like, great, I need to do this now. I was watching the Canada game the other day, and there's a young kid playing for Canada. I think he's really young. I watched him come out, and it was a really tricky spot in that game where I thought, oh, they might fall apart here. And he just came out, and straight away I was like, oh, this guy, he knows what he's doing. He'll be fine. And he smashed the ball everywhere, and Canada went on to win that game. quite easily in the end. But so you have these sorts of situations where you can tell the difference. And the amount of times I've watched Omarzai come out and I'm like, oh my God, like he's the sort of person that probably needs a coach to go and tell him before he goes out. But if you do that with someone like him, he might take it too literally. So sometimes you'll watch, he tries to hit a 6 from first ball. And that's because I think they said, this is the day to attack. And instead of just going, okay, waiting for my ball, go, he just goes, go.
Well, it's interesting because I think how it kind of works for Afghanistan is that, most teams in the world will knock it around in the middle overs and will consolidate, at least their number 4, 5 batters or 3, 4, somewhere around that. But when Omarzai, let's say, comes in at over 35 or 30 at 4 or 5, he exerts pressure right back on the opposition. And somehow that works for Afghanistan. I've seen it happen a couple of times now. And he's done exactly that in this game versus South Africa as well. But anyway, we've spent a lot of time speaking of Afghanistan. We need to go to South Africa a bit,
Do
of
we?
course. I mean, a little bit. They were bowled out for under 150 in 2 consecutive ODIs. That has never happened to South Africa before, ever. And apart from Mulder's 52 in the first game and Markram's unbeaten 69 in the last, there were no other 50-plus scores. And even if this is a depleted side, that was exceedingly poor as far as batting is concerned.
Yeah, I think... So the game I probably watched the most was the middle one. I missed their collapse the first time. I watched a little bit of them winning as well in the third one. I mean, in that middle one, as I said before, they were chasing 300. And you look at their lineup, they've got Dazorzi, Bumrah, Hendricks. And I'm like, those are 3 guys that are... That fits the mold of South African players. Like, I know we think of De Kock as this wildly attacking player, but if you go back through his limited overs numbers, he's probably not quite as attacking. They like to accumulate all the way through, and then they get to that 36, 37 over mark, and then everyone hits sixes. That's what they plan to do. And you look at that side, and it's like, okay, it's not the A team, right? But Bavuma, for a long time, had a great ODI record. I'm a huge fan of Dazorzi. And Reza Hendricks is like one of those he's like the sort of Will Young type players, right? Where you just... Perfect. We can fit him in. He's never going to be a star. It's always funny. I'm always told by people, you underrate Reza Hendricks? I'm like, I might underrate some players. I might overrate some players. I'm pretty sure I accurately rate Reza Hendricks. He's a very good backup player to have in a squad. And he's a very good anchor, but he's not a superstar, and he's never going to be probably a game changer consistently at this level. I don't get why Reza plays. Well, Reza plays because he's been making a lot of runs over the last couple of years. But more important, Reza fits in to the way that they want to play. And that's where I'm getting back to. They were playing in that game against the team and the way that they wanted to go about it. They wanted to knock the ball around. They had plenty of anchors, and they were to get themselves, and they did. They got off to a decent start and everything. That is what is interesting to me. The way that they collapsed from there, because they played their mainstream team quite a lot between the last 2 World Cups. I think they were one of the teams that did it a lot more, and they made sure that they got Miller to the right level, and they got Rassie to the right level, and they got all these guys to the right level. I think they've realized now that they need to chop and change a little bit more. But it's so disappointing because what they would have expected on a flat pitch. I know it's a good attack. We've already talked about them. On a flat pitch, they would have expected them to at least put pressure on Afghanistan. And realistically, outside of the first, 8 overs or 12 overs or whatever it was, I mean, that's almost the entire innings that they played. So, there was a little period at the time where there was a couple of boundaries early on. They were putting some pressure back on, Dazorzi and Bavuma, doing their job and everything. And then from then on in, it was like, it's over. And it looked like they had given up.
Also, Savgi with a brilliant point over here who says that, he or she, sorry, Savgi, I don't know your gender, thinks that the series really showed how reliant South Africa are on their bowlers, most of them who are playing the CPL currently, and Miller and Klaasen to make runs. Yes, I mean, those two are some of the best, or probably right up top in terms of like middle order to lower middle order batters, right? And power hitters. Both Miller and Klaasen are elite.
Yeah, if you go back, I made a piece about maybe a year before the World Cup was on. And I said... And I said basically the way that they had played is they tried to score consistently all the way through and get to that 38 over mark, as I mentioned before. But what kept happening is that Miller, Klaasen, and Rassi kept saving them. So when they did lose early wickets, those guys are all overperforming to a level that we've almost never seen 4, 5, and 6 overperform to ever in the history of ODI cricket, right? That couldn't last because no one can continue to bat at that level. And so what they really need now is Bavuma, maybe Dazorzi, someone else in that top order to be a consistent 40 to 45 run scorer, get themselves up to that level, and then allow Stubbs to be Stubbs later on, right? They've still got Dewell Brevis. They've got other talented players to come through.
Also, I mean, he is a he, Savgi. All right, got that. Also, I mean, not having Rabada or Janssen or Maharaj or the other seamer that I'm forgetting right now definitely did play a role over here, because what we've learned over here is that when, South Africa don't have their first string seamers, then they do struggle a bit.
Yeah, I think this goes back to what they are doing as a team. And, to go back to what I was saying before is that, they're batting for that long period of time and then they're exploding at the end. Yeah. That is very different than the current theme of ODI cricket, right? Current theme of ODI cricket is Travis Head and Rohit Sharma and Phil Saltz and these sorts of guys going ballistic at the top. And then, Liam Livingston and Mitchell Marsh and whoever else, those guys in the middle, right? And really putting pressure on and trying to bludgeon. So those teams have a much higher ceiling of what they can score, because if everything goes right and those, Guy and Maxwell and whoever you want in that middle order go nuts, right? You just go to a huge level up here, right? South Africa are not playing that way. South Africa are playing in a run accumulation way. And even when they get their big scores, like it's usually knocking the ball around and then just hitting a bunch of sixes at the end. That is more like the the Pakistani model. Right?
Yes.
It's not quite as full on. And obviously they do it with much better batting than what Pakistan was doing. But it's very similar. And that means that your bowling has to be on point kind of all the time. Or in South Africa's case, they probably back themselves to make 300 to 350 a lot and a little bit of scoreboard pressure. But these days, 300 to 350 isn't all that much, right? Like we saw, was it USA versus Namibia in a game the other day, just absolutely strolled to 286, right? And I was watching it just going, associate cricket done changed. Because in the old days, you made a big score like that. And it's like, at the very least, there would be an element of panic or an element of, how are we going to do this? And they were just like, no, we'll get there easy. In fact, it might have been the young American batter I was talking about, not young Canadian, when I was talking about before. But so the batting all around, all the way down to like the 18th best team is a lot stronger than it used to. So scoreboard pressure doesn't play as much. So I do think South Africa do need those frontline bowlers available to them to be able to do this. So this is when it gets weird. This is like when you get basketball teams where they have their starters and then their bench, and your starters and your bench might actually need to play completely different styles of basketball, but the coaches can't like commit to that because they're like, no, this is our brand of basketball and you all have to do it. And the bench is like, yeah, but this none of us can do this, but we could actually be good over and try this. And the coach is like, no, because it has to be consistent all the way through. There might be a different way for South Africa to play when they don't have their stars, right?
Yeah.
That they could actually develop. But I think that they believe this is the best way to go. And to be fair, they've played some good limited overs cricket of recent time. They made it to a World Cup final that they should have won, right? Like
and a World Cup semi-final not too long ago, which they
almost won. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So I think they're more than correct in what they are saying. If they were to come out and say to us, this is the model and this is why we are doing this model and we think it can work. The issue is that like there's a downgrade at every position, right? And so it's like maybe there is another style that they could trial out with an experimental team and see how they go. But it feels like to me, watching Reza Hendricks and Pethlequayo play, it's really more of a B team than it is an experimental. I'm not slagging those two guys off, but you know what those two guys could do, right? Like I think we all have seen more than enough of those two players to be like, we know what they could do. Are there other players we don't know what they can do? That's true. And then maybe you even try, a captain, or you say to Bavuma, try something different, just to have fun with it, right? And see how you go.
Yeah, and I'm pretty hopeful that if someone from Cricket South Africa listen to this, they'll have some ideas and some food for thought, and maybe they can try something different whenever they send out a development squad, because that's cricket now. Every now and then you'll have that, right? And you're right to say that their first string players were playing a lot of consecutive cricket. But anyway, that kind of wraps up the talking points. Let's take these super chats. I think we've only got one Jarrod.
I thought,
Oh, well.
oh,
There was Babar Azam thanking you for fixing his toe. And now we've got Agro Kopite. I am really sorry if I butchered your name over there. He asks, Kane Williamson poor stats look down since it's Asia, excluding UAE. So I think what he's trying to say over here is that barring the UAE, Kane Williamson does not have good stats in Asia. I think so.
okay, so he averages 138 in Pakistan, and he averages 33 in India. Is that right? Yeah, 33 in India. Oh God, I'm just trying to look up his numbers. Just making sure I had Kane Williamson. Yeah.
He was averaging 26 in Sri Lanka prior to this call test. I think Estelle told me that.
Yeah. So in Asia overall, that's the weird one because in Asia overall, it's still 48, right? So I'm not really sure 100% what the point of this question is, but then I think the fact that if you want to know what Kane Williamson is looked down upon for, it's not being weak in one particular area, although there are some issues in his career. It's the teams who he's weak against. So he averages 37 against Australia. He averages 37 against England. He averages 38 against India. And against South Africa, he's got a great record. But in South Africa, he's got a record of 21. And what you're talking about here, if you just go through all those different countries, because I think this is why it's nothing to do with Asia, right? He averages 43 in Australia. He averages 30 in England, 33 in India, 21 in South Africa, 30 in Sri Lanka. I think that's it, right? No one's missing the fact that he's struggling in Asia, but there's like lots of gaps in that resume. Yeah. If you compare that to other great players on his level don't usually have that sort of a lopsided thing. And the fact that the 3 best attacks that he's had to, or the 4 best attacks he's had to go up against, 3 of them he's absolutely struggled against, and the other one he's done quite well against at home, is why he's looked down on. So it's nothing to do with Asia. That's the thing, I think, with him. It's the fact that there are so many different holes within his record, every direction that you go in. I don't think that doesn't mean he's not a great batter. But I do think when you're comparing him to the others, so there was I forget the name of the podcast, but the podcast that I think Willow Talk, that Alyssa Healy and Brad Haddon do, and they get lots of Dan Christian and other Australian players go through. I forget the name of the host, but I've never listened to the full podcast. But the interesting stuff they put online is really, really good. They decided to pick their top 4, so their Fab 4 in order, and Alyssa Healy went with Williamson 1, right? And I think, she knows her cricket. Like, I'm not saying she's incorrect here, but what I'm saying is there are still people who rate Kane Williamson really, really high. Whereas I think there's a vast majority of us now that look at that patchy record and it's like, how do you compare that to some of the other records of these other players? Like Joe Root, not great in Australia, but he's still really good against the best teams in the world, right? And so there is an issue with Williamson Singh. I think that's a much bigger issue than the Asia one. And the Asia one's messy, as I said, because he's still averaging 48 in Asia. It's just that he's been particularly bad in a couple of places at a couple of times, and then made runs in other places, which is the excluding UAE. You can't exclude the UAE if you're looking at someone's record in Asia, though, because those are proper Asian conditions, right? So that's also not fair to do. So I just think it's a bit mishy-mashy.
He averages 138 in Pakistan. Small sample size, albeit. But I mean, Jarrod, if you batted over here in Pakistan, you'd probably average 48 as well, right?
I think I'm trying to think of some of those wickets. Rawalpindi, I reckon I could make 20.
Well, not anymore. Right? They kind of fixed it.
Yeah, but on some of those Rawalpindi wickets, I wonder if I don't like tall bowlers though, Behram. I'll tell you what, though, if I was facing the current the current Pakistani bowlers, I'll put my hand up for 20. I'll give it a go.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, where did Kane fall in the top 50? I can't remember what his number was.
Well, that's because we haven't announced the numbers yet, Behram. He's middle of the road, I suppose. That's me being safe because I also don't remember exactly his number. I know he is. I'm 100% sure he's the lowest of the Fab 4. And I think he's a tier or 2 tiers below the next Fab 4 person. Right. Okay. So he's a bit of a, he's a bit further down. But I don't remember. if you were to ask me to guess off the top of my head, I know this for a fact. This is the one player I can remember their number, right? Is Inzamam al-Haq is 37, right? And I reckon Kane is near Inzamam al-Haq. That is my memory of those two players. That when I look at the list, they're near each other. But yeah, we're still tinkering a little bit as well. I don't think Kane's going to go any higher though. With those sorts of things. Varun, stop telling everyone where everyone is.
We were kind of trying to tickle their balls so they would buy the book, Varun.
But yes, that's a good point. I mean, he's got that right. I think it is in that section of Shivnarine Chandrapal and Steve Waugh. And the reason I have those guys all together is because they all have brilliant overall averages and they're all obviously great batters, but there are issues when you dive deeper into their numbers. Like, for instance, Chandrapal and Waugh were needed to bat higher in their teams, right? And they chose the easier batting spots. And how do you rate that against other players like Williamson, who's had to bat number 3 in New Zealand his whole life, right? That, I don't think that, I'm not, and that's not to say that Chandrapal and Moore are not great, but that's what that book, a lot of that chapter anyway, is about, is like literally where you get to with that sort of stuff. It's called The Art of Batting, and it's available for pre-order on Amazon now.
Yeah, and we should be ending this podcast, but I'm going to throw another one at you. Your mate, the late, great Martin Crowe or Kane Williamson? Because Wasim Akram says that Martin Crowe is one of the toughest batters he has ever bowled to. That is high praise.
Yeah.
And he negated his reverse swing because he used to just bat with the angle of the bat facing inward, so he would never edge it. That was the science.
I mean, the man was a genius. It really was. I think with Martin Crowe, because he probably was one of those players who should have started to play slightly later when he needed to emotionally develop later, right? So he plays too early, but that's very common with New Zealand players. So quite often their overall average is a little bit lower than it should be because they're thrown in when they're not ready because they don't have any other players. And I think his body fell apart at the end. I would put Martin Crowe not far away from that sort of Javed Miandad level, George Headley level of just a batting genius. Of like, I would watch cricket with him and he would just say things where I was like, I've never heard another human being say that. Right? Like, and he just thought about things on a completely different level. But that even with era ratios and match ratios and all the things we did, I couldn't find a way to put Martin Crowe any higher in the list. So I'm pretty sure that the highest player in New Zealand batter in the list is Kane Williamson, and Martin Crowe is probably let's use Inzi as the divider. I'm pretty sure he's above Inzi, not below Inzi, Martin Crowe, in that area. I think it's really the reason I remember Inzi's number so much is that that's the bit where I don't think there's really any debate that the player should be on the list. Right? So from Inzi on down, everyone should be on the list. And we've got Inzi, as I said, at that number, you could probably make a lot of cases for someone like him to be a little bit higher. Whereas if you compare him to like someone like Mohammad Yusuf, right, who Mohammad Yusuf has been in the 50 and out of the 50 as many, like Mohammad Yusuf is somewhere just dizzy at the moment, not knowing why we keep moving him in and out of this list. And that's not to say he's not a great player, but his record isn't as rock solid as some of the others. So once you get into that sort of 37 mark, everyone on that list, I think, I don't think there shouldn't be any debate that player should be on the list at that point. And so Martin Crowe is just above Inzi, where I think if you've been really, really harsh, you could push him out. I think the reverse swing thing is maybe one of the reasons we've had him as high as he is. And also, when Martin Crowe was at his peak, when he was batting at his best, everyone in the world had him listed, incredibly high. And I think, and I'm talking about the bowlers who bowled to him, like people like Wasim Akram, but there's lots of people, like lots of the West Indians will talk about Martin Crowe. And so, did you ever listen to the podcast we did with, oh my God, talk about forgetting names today. This guy's a friend of mine and also a former New Zealand captain. Who's the guy that captained New Zealand in the 80s? I can remember. The Praying Mantis.
I know. The opening bat. No.
Oh my God.
How he's a friend of yours. I know you did a podcast. Yeah, Jeremy Coney. Jeremy Coney. Oh
my God, Coney. Luckily, he sometimes watches the podcast. 49 minutes in, I reckon he's already fallen asleep. We're okay, right? He doesn't watch them. He listens to them. He probably gets like someone to play them for him. Sorry, Coney, but I remember talking to him, about different levels of players. And when we went through the New Zealand team, right, me and him did this huge video. It's a really interesting video. I think it's on this channel. I don't even think it was on the main channel, where we looked at the New Zealand team, the great, the golden era that we just talked about, all those great players. And then we compared it to the team of the 80s. And we went really deep, me and Coney. And I started it thinking that the current team was just way better and that Coney was on drugs, right? By the end, the more details that me and Coney got into it, we were like, actually, this 80s team probably was at the same level and was probably a better team in harder locations than the other team was, right? They didn't win the World Test Championship and they happened to run into Pakistan and the West Indies, right? So they had two great sides who were better than them. But if you balance it out, with Crowe, I kind of assumed the same thing would happen, and I didn't quite get there. There's just a bit like Williamson. There's a couple of blips in his career, but the difference is that when Williamson isn't blipping, he's like averaging 200 against a team or in a location, right? Like there's no middle ground with Williamson. He's either really struggling and almost a below replacement level player, or he's Bradman. And so it really depends on what you like. I mean, if you say that facing reverse swing and the West Indies, right, with the two hardest things that Martin Crowe had to do in his career, and he conquered both of them, right? And that's, I'm not saying he did, but if you were to have a look and you would say that he did that. So versus the West Indies, Martin Crowe averaged 45.
Wow,
right?
That's insane.
They were a pretty good side, and they came to New Zealand to bowl on green tops. Right.
Yeah. And Varun has just put out a stat over here that Martin Crowe was twice as good as the other New Zealand batters when the bowling attacks averaged less than 30.
So I think this is the thing with someone like Crowe is, and it's a real shame he passed away before I started this book. I mean, it's a real shame he passed away because, he was a friend and he was a legend and he had so much knowledge to impart on the world. Martin Crowe would be doing a podcast every day with us if he was around now. This is his ideal situation. And he nerded out on everything. But I think I think that would be the really interesting thing of like his record against Pakistan wasn't, I don't think, as solid overall. But I think he's the sort of player who, when it was very tough and very hard, he was like, I'm going to just take it to another level. And when he did that, I remember he faced, I must have been about 40 odd, and he hadn't picked up the bat much. I'm pretty sure this is true. And he played against an England A team. Actually, it might have even been the full-strength England team. It was like a really high team. Alex Tudor was one of the bowlers, and there was another like international quality bowler. And like they were told beforehand, Martin Crowe, he's the real deal. And you can imagine what these 25-year-old fast bowlers thought. They were like, yeah, good one. Yeah, we're just going to bowl to him. And he's like an old man. And he stroked them around. And Alex Tudor still talks about that innings of like being one of the best innings that was ever played against him. Right, by our that was the level at which we really see Martin Crowe at another level. You can't just throw Martin Crowe in at the 40-minute mark and not expect me to go nuts.
This was a podcast about Afghanistan versus South Africa, and that was the first 30 minutes of it. For the last 23 minutes, we've been talking about New Zealand batters.
To be honest, though, it took me 20 minutes to remember Jeremy Coney's name.
Yeah. Also, one more super chat. Argo Kopite once again says or asks, will RS all attack approach work on Australian pitches?
So he's talking about Rohit Sharma in the Test series, I would assume.
Is that what he's saying?
I think in Australia, I think those pitches kind of suit Rohit Sharma a little bit more because he doesn't have to attack; he just needs to punch. And I think Rohit Sharma's at his absolute best when he's just punching the ball. And in Australia, the ball just comes on so fast. So whether he's going to be successful or not, I mean, that's something else. But I don't think there's anything within the conditions that are going to cause him problems. Pulling on Australian wickets is very different than pulling on Indian wickets for two reasons. The boundaries are like twice as long, and you are going to get more top edges, right? Like that is a legitimate thing that is going to happen. So those things will play a part, but I don't have any issues with his batting in that.
I would love to see him have a crack at it. In fact, Khawaja versus Sharma in Australia will be, a treat. We'll finally get to know who's better. Krunk says, by the way, you guys should make these Bumrah videos a monthly special. I'm not even joking. I don't think we've made as much or gotten as much views on anything other than the Bumrah videos. Like if you combine all of them, it's probably a lot of views.
Do you know what? I was thinking about this the other day of like there's something about Bumrah that as a writer, and So we talked about this before, but McCullum, if you look at whatever year it was, 2015, I wrote like 4 features on McCullum in 1 year because what I was watching, I'd never seen before, right? And I remember like my editors being like, "You're crazy," and I was like, "No, you got to. I'm here at a time where something is changing." I had no idea Bazball or anything was going to come. Right? He was just a New Zealand player back then.
Yeah.
And Bumrah is another one where it is really hard for me to watch him bowl and not my brain not to work over. Do you know what I mean? For me, it's not. I don't give a shit that it's Bumrah or or anything. I don't. I love Rabada and I love watching Rabada bowl. I don't think I've ever watched Rabada and at the end gone, "Oh, I've got an idea for a piece." It just there's nothing. It's something about his bowling that doesn't come to my mind. AB de Villiers, another player I love watching. Where then you get someone like Bumrah, and you're just like, I could literally be doing something on Bumrah. Like he says monthly, I could cover him like every 8 minutes, right? KL Rahul is another player, just randomly. I watch KL Rahul and I find a new pattern, and suddenly I'm like, I've got to do something on KL Rahul. And Joe Root is another one. These sorts of guys, I just think I could just do so much content on consistently. So for me, it's not really about the player or anything else. It's about, have they captured a mood or have they just flicked something in my brain? There's a reason why I go on and on about Benny Howell or some of these, random players. It's not because I know Benny Howell. It's because when watching Benny Howell makes me think of 40 other things. And suddenly like I've got all these ideas. I didn't plan another Bumrah video this week, but the minute I saw that stat, I was like, great. And that video that's on the main channel at the moment came out of a scoreboard when I looked at our own graphic and I was like, oh shit, look, all these guys have something in common here. And next thing you know, there's another video. And that's what Bumrah does.
Yeah. And I mean, watching him is a visceral experience, to say the least. He's like a ballad with all these different notes, and each one of those notes is just so intriguing that you want to, or like you are compelled to deep dive into it. I mean, we've done like 3 Bumrah videos already, I feel.
I've done 3 Bumrah videos.
Anyway, this podcast has gone far too long, more than we anticipated at least. And you guys do let us know in the comment section, all viewers and listeners, who you think is better, Kane or Martin Crowe, and where Kane Williamson falls on the Fab 4 spectrum, because that's what this podcast became all about it in the end anyway. So yeah, thank you for all the chats and the super chats, guys. Just a quick reminder, you can go to goodareas.co and bookmark that webpage. It can prove to be your one-stop shop for all the work that we do as part of our team, whether it be written content, videos, or podcasts. We'll be back with another Good Areas live episode soon enough, maybe later in the week. But that's all for now. You guys have a good one, and goodbye.
I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories, like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan lost a top batter after he was on the run from an angry husband of a movie star he was having an affair with, and also how one future captain of his nation realised he might have to go out and bat at Lords and that he didn't own his own pads. Cricket was used as a tool by the Empire,